Well, this video is going to be on the longer side. If you've seen my previous videos, you know I had issues with the machine not working at all, and a solenoid for a safety valve back here was causing issues. That one is still causing issues. But this video will also be covering that I removed the oil sump, the pan at the bottom of the engine. That was quite a big job because it has been a little damaged at the bottom. Also repacked this cylinder because it has been dripping a little bit for a while, and I was worried it was still leaking after the rebuild, but I probably had some residue oil because I had a few drops under it, but more on that. Fixed a few small leaks in the back here. On here one of the connections has been leaking a tiny bit, and a coolant valve over here where you can turn off the heat inside the cab, and well, a few minor things. Looked over the filters that I didn't have any surprises on this, but as I said, it's gonna be a long video if I'm gonna cover everything here, and I'm not done.
It will be done in kind of the reverse order of things, because I thought I was finished with the machine for the wrenching I wanted to do, but I tried backing it out to the garage for winter parking and get the space freed up, and I did not get very far at all before everything died on me again. I looked at the option to hook up a pressure gauge and test the pressure from that safety valve, that it opens as it should. Removed some plates for better access to hook up a pressure gauge. It's listed as a PT 1/8 thread. I cannot find any of these minimess outlets that come with that thread, and adding adapters and so on would build up too much. It just has a threaded plug there in all the ports for measuring any pressure, and I'm not sure. I need to find a suitable solution if this is gonna cause more issues in the future, so I can read pressures from other places in the machine. I was able to hook up the gauge eventually. It's hard to get any good video down in there. It's not the correct threads, and I didn't want to over tighten things, and I had a lot of like sealant tape on there, and it was not sealing fully, but I figured I would get some readings. It was started and zero pressure here, so the valve seems to not open at all. And rather than remove the battery and the tray for that, and to gain access to the valves and solenoids and all that, we decided to remove the counterweight instead for access, and then the machine can still easily be started if I need to test things. It's been very warm for the season, so wrenching outside wasn't too bad. That's lucky, because I decided to bring both the valves and the solenoids into the garage to see if I could kind of figure out what's going on. Looking at them very closely, they are not identical. They look a little different at the end. The thread and everything is the same. I tried like hooking up the battery to see if it would work and click on me. Got a little bit of sparking, but no go on any of the solenoids. Tried multiple things, kind of drove me a little crazy. Ran out of battery in the camera. I ended up hooking up ampere meter to measure the current going through them, and when I started clamping things in place better and getting a really good connection, I started getting clicks out of them. So they require a very good connection to the power source, so I have an electrical issue somewhere. Was quite windy. Did some more tests out on the machine and ensuring that I get good clicks, and the high-low solenoid get good clicks. The safety valve does not. So I decided to just install that high-low solenoid onto the safety valve and get it back into the garage for further diagnosis.
But
So now let's focus on the stuff I've actually managed to fix on the machine so far. It's the hydraulic cylinder here I'm starting to tackle. Took some measurements because I was going to have a local shop plasma cut or laser cut some pieces, including a tool to open it and a new skid plate for the machine that was busted. Required a little bit of fine tuning the tool and my rotary tool. I have yet still not invested in a new one. A little bit of hammering, and I wanted to loosen this cap I had already removed. It's a kind of lock washer thing. You bend a little, like trying to flatten that out as best as I could. And since I had got to the trouble of buying a tool for it, it actually came undone quite easily. That's usually how it goes if I start trying to just use some punch of some kind and try to loosen it. I damage things badly, and it feels like it needs a lot of force. With the proper tool, it feels like it goes super easy. The hydraulic hoses were undone. Put some caps in place on the machine. They should be the correct caps. I've had the entire arm off and installed some of those expanding bushings and stuff at the base of the arm some years back. But the caps didn't really want to fit super well. Whatever. A little strap to hold it in place, and then the top pin could be removed. That came out super easily. And with the cylinder lowered down, the lid could be lowered down or unscrewed. I think some call it a gland in English. Left it for a little bit, letting the oil above the piston head drain out, and covering the view of the big oil spill when we pulled it out, because we missed the drain pan completely, but sawdust and rags will take care of that. And the nuts at the end of these hydraulic cylinders can be on there quite hard. I know the last time we had a cylinder apart, it took a lot of force, and then we had a clamp to the forks on a tractor and this big long pipe at the end. Here we rigged it up, back installed on the machine, and then a big chain and a strap securing it to the machine, and then a big adjustable wrench, and then the chain block to help with the force of undoing the nut. After some adjustment of the straps so it wouldn't pull sideways too much up and down, it came undone without too much trouble. Made sure to take accurate measurements, and I usually just source the seals and bushings and such locally. I've found that ordering the parts from Yanmar dealers is quite costly. Usually you can get away with a lot cheaper, and as long as they have correct pressure ratings and so on, it's not magic. It's just seals and everything is metric. Had a little trouble with the bushing. Got the main pressure seal out without too much trouble. Doesn't look super bad, but feels kind of stiff, and can see it leaking even if I have seen a lot worse. Dust seal is held in place with an extra lock ring outside of it, giving it some taps down and loosening up the paint. The machine has like 5,000 hours, and this cylinder has not been touched before. Some of the others have been repacked. Lock ring coming out, and then I ended up with some destruction getting the dust seal out. It was well on there. Cut it to weaken it a little. There is a bushing then inside it also, and since I was this deep in, I wanted to replace all the wear parts. Tried getting in that with this blind bearing puller, but that bushing did not want to budge. Maybe adding heat and so on could have helped, but I went the destructive method here also. Some hammering and kind of forcing it out. at the section where it has a split in it. It did cause a little damage in the bore, but the rotary tool could smooth that out. And while waiting for parts for the hydraulic cylinder, I started looking at the oil drain plug, and I'd loosened the rear motor mounts. Seemed to have a little oil on the camera or something here, and I could start kind of lifting it up for a little more access. And going underneath to check the clearance and access. If I'm ever doing this again, I'm pulling the motor out of the machine. I'm never touching this oil pan again with the engine still inside the machine. And even removed some stuff around the fan, cooling the engine, that gave a little more clearance, could lift the engine a tiny bit higher. And the pan is it's not a gasket, it's just some liquid sealant, some silicone, so it's kind of glued in place. Knife wedged in between could help start it to let go. And it was very tight getting the pan out of the hole underneath, and I had my dad with a crowbar kind of pushing back the feed pipe for the hydraulic line, and then he let go in the middle, so the hydraulic line started pushing back at the oil pan. But it made its way out. Here you can see the inside. It's like a triangular reinforcement plate that holds the threads. The oil pan itself is very thin, and that reinforcement plate has gotten some bend at some point. Someone has tightened the drain plug as if it was a cast iron pan or something. We tried hammering it a little and kind of flatten it. Searched the garage for a nut and bolt and some washers and a socket on the inside to make kind of a makeshift press to help flatten things even more. Once happy with the flatness, we did a very light sanding of the surface. After done, there was a lot of work scraping away the old gasket material. The oil pan itself was cleaned thoroughly, and then a suitable amount of high temperature silicone this time around. That was what we had at hand, and it should do the job, was applied. Once satisfied with the sealant, it was time to fit it in the machine. I had done some dowel pins with some threaded rods that were pointy in a couple of the bolt holes to help align things, and we had put some luggage straps holding back that big hydraulic line feeding the pump, so that wouldn't interfere with getting it back into the machine. And my dad had a hand from above helping out, getting things aligned. And once we had it in place, we could start tightening a few bolts down. And once a couple were in place, we could relax. I had bought this fancy ratchet where you twist the handle and it advances the bolt. I figured that could help out with a few of the hard to reach bolts, and it actually did, even if it was not easy getting access to the hardest to reach ones. As I said, I cannot recommend doing this job with the engine still in the machine. I just tightened them down gently, a couple of Newton meters. I actually brought out the torque wrench, and then the following day they were torqued to the proper specification. I'm missing a little bit of video footage because we did install a little bit of a steel band from one of the bolts as a weight, and drilled a tiny little hole in the plug at the bottom, because since the surface isn't perfect, I'm gonna go for a rubber seal on the plug rather than a crush washer of any kind, and tighten it very gently, and then add like a zip tie between a little steel string we added to that hole we drilled, and that's a steel band we installed that loops down as a security that it can never come undone. And I plan on replacing that rubber seal and the zip tie on every oil change. That should ensure that everything is great. So the oil pan is back, the plug is in place, it's time to fill some oil.
Took about 5 liters to fill up. It's hard to see, but the level is right in the middle between the marks. It's quite a big gap on this one with the markings, but should be good enough to start it.
And if you're awake now, you realize I might have had the hydraulic cylinder apart still. I did not. It was already back in place and together once it was started. So the order of the things I do in this video might be a little messed up, but I also tackled a small coolant leak on that valve I talked about in the beginning. There is a drain plug for the coolant at the bottom here, so that had actually had to be kind of loosened and moved to the side to tackle that engine, the oil pan. So I drained a couple of liters to ensure the level was below the valve I was gonna look at. And the valve in question sits in here between the radiator and the engine, and this is how you control the heat to the cabin in this old machine. There is no way to control it from inside the cab. You open or close this valve depending if you want heat in the cab or not, and it's a super simple valve. If you lift it up, the nut at the top has no sealing function whatsoever really. It's the cone part at the end that goes into a hole that directs the flow, and then it has a simple O-ring above it, and I just need a new O-ring for that in the correct size, suitable for coolant, and it should be fixed. Had opened up and visually inspected the hydraulic filters on it when it was in the garage and looked over, and I had messed up putting the lid back on because the main filter is pressurized and it has a seal at the lid, and when I put that back together I had messed up and damaged that seal, so when it was first started it was leaking oil. Hydraulic oil level gauge has been dripping a tiny bit. It had some of these like fiber seals on it. It was replaced with some new rubber based seals. Only problem sourcing new parts for the hydraulic cylinder was this bushing. They couldn't get the correct length or width, so it had to be cut off a little bit, but my dad's friend has a lathe and made easy work of sorting that out, and that could be driven into place. The main seal inside here, I made sure to oil everything, but I didn't heat it up or anything. Cylinders this big or bigger, it's usually quite easy. The smaller the cylinders, the harder they are. I did not have anything suitable to install the new dust seal on the other hand. Ended up going around it and gently giving it taps all the way around, and it started going in. And to get it down into the recess I had a small punch with gentle taps and making sure to move round and round slowly. Get a proper tool if you're in a real hurry to get the job done. Otherwise take your time and don't damage the things. And then the lock ring. The lock washer for the gland had some burrs on it and some damage, but it was flattened on an anvil and then a file. And then the different O-rings and wear bands and everything. Did a test. I thought I had to give up because it can be quite hard to get new seals onto the piston rods, and I figured lifting it out might be too hard, but I thought I should give it a try, and it slid on there without too much trouble. Piston head is a split design, so removing and installing new seals is very coated everything in oil, ensure that the support washers or the white plastic things and everything was correctly positioned. With everything in place, I had to kind of think a little and ensure that I had all the pieces where they should be. Had a little bit of that blue Loctite I use almost everywhere to the nut, even if it does not seem like it have had any kind of tread lock on it. Hook up the chain to secure it again, and then the same as removal. Hooked up the trusty chain block and pulled it good and tight. Click! Chain block again to help align everything, and then they usually need a little bit of force to get in there, and it kind of wanted to bounce back out, but eventually it popped in there and starting to go back together. A few taps on the lid, the gland, moving that into place, and that could be tightened up. I never removed the wrench since it needed a little bit of hammering to get on there and some hammering to get it off. And then I put some dents in that lock washer, ensuring the gland doesn't come undone. Took a few attempts with cylinder in and out before we had things aligned with the hole, and then it was just a matter of being able to fit the shims that ensure there isn't too much side to side play up here. But eventually everything lined up and we could start getting the pin back in there. Thought my fancy ratchet wrench broke on me here, but turned out I had the wrong size. It should have had a size smaller, and no harm done. Hydraulic hoses could go back together, and prepared to install the protective plate that sits on this cylinder. And I found some more of the video footage from installing the oil pan, where that steel band I talked about earlier can be seen, that was bolted to one of the bolts, and I added some shrink tubing to ensure it doesn't rub against the oil pan. And maybe you can see at some point that there is a hole drilled at the edge of the plug. I added some steel wire to that, and then I will just use a zip tie to secure so that the drain plug can never come undone. And installing the motor mounts, and the little valve you can see closest to the camera is a fuel valve. That one has also had a drop of diesel leaking out of it, very small leak. I changed an O-ring on that also. I think there are some more internal seals there that maybe should be replaced, but I'm trying just the outermost O-ring for now. Here you can see the metal part around the fan I removed to be able to lift the engine a tiny bit higher. That stringy thing you can see in the frame also, that should be folded over. It was left there because it was zip tied to stuff, and that should be folded down and also be a protection around the fan. That was reinstalled. Adding the security to the drain plug. Would you trust your engine with the zip tie? I don't think the plug would come undone even without it, but a rubber seal, even if it's not a lot of torque on it, it creates some pressure that usually stops it from backing out. But I will probably maybe check this an extra time or two before the next oil change, just to be safe. A tiny bit of grease helping that O-ring from that coolant valve slide into place. That one has been leaking for a long time, but as long as you've had it in the full heating position, but I usually operate it with the door open most of the summer, so even if it's been on full heating all the time, it's just been a few drops. It hasn't been a real leak, but trying to close it, it's been leaking quite badly at the end. And the new rubber washers for the sight glass on the hydraulic tank. New o-ring for the filter lid. This time I added some grease to it to help ensure that it stays in place. Filling the coolant back up. Hydraulic oil was topped off. Had noticed a tiny new leak that I did not actually know about before I brought it into the garage, as it had been sitting there. A tiny drop or a tiny little oil stain had formed underneath the coupling for one of the hydraulic hoses to the blade cylinder. After some good cleanup under here, it's probably dirt that might be 20 years old, because I've never been cleaning in under here ever before, and probably not previous owners either. I could confirm that the elbow that the hydraulic hose connects to, it had received a little bit of damage and was bent. This was just leaking from the threads, and it just relies on some of that, like tape, sealant tape, sealing this part. But I bought a new 90-degree angle here and had it replaced. Replaced the grease fitting, grease nipple at the top of the arm that has been causing a little issues, been hard to feed grease into. And here we're getting close to the beginning of the video. The counterweight was reinstalled because we thought we were finished with this machine, but turned out not so much since it's still in the garage. Had rigged up a rope to the ceiling to help lift the hood back into place, because it's a little bit awkwardly heavy. So that went on there quite smoothly. Luckily it was possible to remove the counterweight without removing this when we were outside, but using the chain block would have been tricky. But just putting that chain on the fork, as you saw in the beginning of the video, it's possible to remove it without removing the hood. And the company that made the wrench for the hydraulic cylinder had also cut out a beefier skid plate for underneath the machine. I had done some careful measuring and giving him the places for bolt holes, and he had countersunk them. The bolts will stick out a tiny bit. Would have had to go up to an even thicker plate under here to have them fully countersunk, but it should be an improvement. So this turned into quite a long video, and still it's not fully done since I have that electrical issue with the safety valve. I sure hope it's something simple, but time will tell. Thank you for watching, have a good day.